Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Nicholas Wood's film, Criers. So, I think this is going to be one of those videos where, because I have a number of critiques of this film, that's going to sort of belie the fact that I actually really like it. I think it's a fun, interesting movie. In part interesting because of its flaws. But I think it's a really cool movie. And I do want to establish that up front because a lot of this video, I think, is going to end up being me pointing out problems and limitations of it. And I don't want that to give the impression that I don't genuinely enjoy it. So, contextually, this film is made by, I forgot to look up exactly the name of the studio. I had IMDb pulled up over here. Redemption 46 Studios. I knew it was something like that, but for some reason I was thinking 48. But it's Redemption 46 Studios. And one of the cool things, from my perspective, about Redemption 46 Studios is that they are here in Pennsylvania. I live in Pennsylvania, and Redemption 46 is a Philly-based independent movie and video studio. They're not exactly local to me because I live in the center of Pennsylvania, so I'm about 3 hours from Philly, but nonetheless in my current home state, so that's very, very cool. The other thing that's very, very cool about Redemption 46 is they seem to be primarily, if not exclusively, Black-owned and operated, which is important because they seem to make a lot of horror movies, including Criers, which is a zombie movie. And that's, I think, significant because historically, in horror movies, Black people have either not been depicted at all or have generally died off pretty quickly, right? This is one of those stereotypical tropes of horror movies that actually a lot of horror noir or Black horror, which I've made a whole series of videos about some of them for Halloween 2 years ago, I think. 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I want to say 2 years ago. Anyway, one of the sort of things that you see with a lot of horror noir is this sort of awareness of the generic conventions in which Black people in horror movies always die. And there's a lot of play with that. And so one of the things that Redemption 46 does with, I think with their horror movies is they really center Black people not in roles where they're just dying, but in roles where they are protagonists, where they are survivors, where they are villains, etc., right? It is all of the roles that you would find in horror movies. So you have that degree of representation. And I actually think, I will say for all of the potential problems that may have been created with the dominance of streaming services as opposed to the traditional film industry, one benefit of it, in my view, as somebody not working in the industry, is that independent studios who create movies, who represent perspectives, who hire people of color, who hire female directors, LGBT directors, immigrant directors, whatever it is, people who mainstream movie studios typically would be reluctant to hire. The indie film industry gives these people many more opportunities, And the rise of streaming services gives indie studios more opportunities to get their films viewed. Whereas in a cinematic economy that depends on movie theaters as such to show films, indie studios can't really compete that well. So all of that is there. Okay, so let's talk about Criers itself. So Criers is a zombie apocalypse film. It's got a 2 hour and 45 minute runtime, but basically the plot is that these two sisters and their teams of paramilitary folks are looking for one another. So Mia and Max, they've been separated somehow in this zombie apocalypse. So they're now in sort of post-zombified Philadelphia, and they are trying to find one another. They're also working with groups that are seeking out survivors, trying to bring them back to bases, rebuild civilization, etc., etc. This old zombie chestnut. They have to navigate random hordes of the undead, against standard zombie movie stuff. They also have to navigate cannibal humans who have decided that the time has come to start trapping and eating other human beings. And they have to just sort of, find one another, wandering through this world, basically at random. So that's the central premise. Part of the reason you can distill the film down that much, even though it has a 2 hour and 45 minute runtime, is because not a spectacular amount of plot actually happens. Huge chunks of the movie are dedicated to just watching people in paramilitary gear walking around with assault rifles and pistols and shooting zombies. Or just walking sometimes. Massive amounts of the film are literally just these fight scenes that do not move the plot along in any way. And I don't hate that. They're fun, but they don't move the plot along in any way. You also have long periods of the movie where basically we're just sort of getting close-ups on people's faces while they are expressive. And again, totally fine. You're free to do that as a filmmaker, but it generally doesn't move the plot along that much, and it does slow the action down at substantial points of it. So, some of the things with the film. I'm going to start with a couple of small things that bothered me, and then I'll get to this sort of really big glaring issue with the film, which I actually think there isn't potentially an explanation for, but I don't know for sure. I will at some point in the not too distant future. So one thing that I had an immediate sort of question mark about is this is a world in which zombies are very, very sensitive to the smell of blood, right? So there's a couple of times in which people get relatively minor cuts and they're like, oh no, now the zombies are going to show up. We've got to get out of here. So that's fine as a premise. Cool. Totally good, right? That ups the stakes. Don't get injured or you get eaten by zombies. Cool. I'm on board with that. However, two concerns I have with this. One, this is a world where being cut is highly likely to produce your horrific death and possible zombification. And yet, most of the characters don't wear jackets. Like a disproportionate number of the characters have boots, camo pants, full sort of rig of like magazines, ammo, knives, whatever it is, and t-shirts. often a hat. Some people don't even have hats. But comparatively few of them. One person, the nurse, did a relatively big cast. Let me see if I can. I'm looking at the IMDb page, so that's what I'm. Rain. Sorry. So Rain, the nurse, is in a tank top with just camo pants, boots, and a belt with a knife on it. If you're in a world where being cut, bleeding in any way, substantially attracts the attention of zombies, you should get a jacket. Cover those arms up, and get gloves, right? Cover up the places on your body that are likely to be cut. Get a military jacket. These people clearly have military gear available to them. Get a jacket and put it on, and then you decrease the risk of being cut. And indeed, one guy in one of the paramilitaries is cut right about here, and he has to deal with that, right? He's like, we got to get some mud and put that on this wound. This is my second question. Why don't you all have first aid kits? I mean, Mia was a survivalist. Max was a sheriff. Many of these people are wearing official U.S. military stuff. You would presume that they were veterans. Why don't you all have basic first aid training? If your nurse, and she does at one point say this, is like, I carry alcohol and bandages. Anybody can do that. Yes, if that's what your nurse is doing, that is the most fundamental of first aid that all of you as law enforcement, as military, as survivalists, you should all know basic first aid. You should be able to dress something like a cut. So there's that. Another issue that I have, and I think this is probably a practical problem. Well, I don't even know. I think it may be just a carelessness problem. And this happens all the time with films. So again, it's not a real critique at the end of the day, but there are groups of people who have descended into cannibalism. They've decided that because of the zombie apocalypse, they're going to start murdering people, and they're going to eat their flesh. Okay, cool. Zombie apocalypse, survival situation. You do what you got to do at some stage. But we see several vending machines in the film, which are lit up, which means they still have power. And in one extended fight scene toward the end, we see the front of a snack vending machine, just full of snacks, right? Like, you guys have decided to fucking lure people in, murder them, and eat them when there's Doritos right there. Like, you're making that choice. It's not a situation yet where you're like, there's no other food available. We have to do this thing. Like, you have chosen cannibalism instead of looting a vending machine. Like, that's where I would start. Like, if I'm in a zombie apocalypse and I come across a vending machine that's stocked with stuff, I am looting the fuck out of it, right? I am taking every one of those snacks, even if I don't want them, just because that's food that I can eat to keep myself alive in a zombie apocalypse. Along a similar line, this is another very small critique, but along a similar line in terms of the sort of wastefulness of this apparently post-apocalyptic society, generally in the film, we don't see mag changes, right? So these people have assault rifles. They have, one person has a shotgun. They mostly have pistols with them. We do not typically, and they expend a lot of ammo. We do not really see them reload for the most part, right? We see a couple of times where someone will take out the magazine and then put in a new magazine. And frequently, at least one time definitely, and I think a second time, when they take that magazine out, they drop it on the ground and continue walking. Now, that's not inherently a problem, right? That's a video game trope, right? I don't know if actual military people drop mags when they finish them or what. I don't know. I've never been in the military. I've never been trained for the military. But what occurs to me is that if you are in a post-apocalyptic survival situation, that magazine is a reusable resource. It is difficult to manufacture. It can be reloaded. And you've just abandoned it. I get that there are some potential practical, pragmatic arguments for doing this. One is not carrying around empty mags decreases the weight on you, which means that you can go further, longer, right? Your stamina will sustain you better. If you, and I would imagine that an empty pouch for a magazine feels different than a full pouch for a magazine. And you don't necessarily want to reach for your next magazine in the middle of a zombie attack and then realize that you've pulled an empty one, right? So, okay, that's fine. But you have limited access to resources, right? I guarantee you this is not a world in which manufacturing is running. So those kinds of highly constructed manufactured items that are incredibly valuable for what you're doing, you probably don't want to abandon them. So there's those things. Also, along those lines of the lack of manufactured stuff, this is a world that's apparently existed for several years, right? The zombie apocalypse has been on for a few years, is at least the implication here. And I'll come to why that's an implication in just a minute. And for the most part, and these are all like paramilitary people, they've been out for days, seemingly, out just fighting zombies, walking around the woods, going through dirty, dilapidated buildings. Most of them, their clothes are pretty clean. Right? Like normally in sort of post-apocalyptic stories, people are getting kind of ragged, their clothes are dirty, you're in a survival situation, you're not exactly doing laundry, etc., etc. Your clothes get ripped and you sew them up, etc., etc. None of that seems to be the case for most of these people. Like, they don't even have sweat stains on their t-shirts for the most part. So they're very, very clean, which makes them look better, but it looks less apocalyptic in my view. So that's all the sort of minor stuff that is really not that important, but it did sort of grate on me slightly. The big issue with the film is the plot and characters are not explained. So in this film, there's we don't learn much about the characters beyond their sort of immediate objectives, their general attitude toward like, we have to survive, we have to find survivors, we have to carry out our mission, I have to find my sister, these sorts of things, right? So we get all that kind of stuff. We don't really get much development of the characters. We don't really get much of their backstory beyond people mention that Maya was a sheriff and Mia was a survivalist, whatever it is, right? Or Max was a survivalist. Sorry, or Max was a sheriff. Mia was a survivalist, right? So we get little bits and pieces of things, but we don't find out a massive amount about these characters. And actually the character that I'm most interested in is Preacher, who I think is super, super interesting. And and we just don't learn much about him. We also don't learn much about this world. Like, sure, post-apocalyptic, zombies all over the place, society has broken down, there's small groups of sort of commando-type paramilitary people roaming around theoretically looking for survivors, although realistically almost nothing that any of these people do in the film seems geared to actually finding survivors. They seem to mostly just sort of be walking at random. But anyway, how did this world come into existence? What happened that started this zombie apocalypse? How are these groups of small paramilitary units organized? We never see any of their camps. There's very little actual information about this world and why it exists in the way it exists. And the caveat I'm going to put on that is, I think that this film is a sequel to or picks up from a film called The Decade. Because Criers was written by Delia Ruffin and Nicholas Wood. The Decade was written by Delia Ruffin. Yeah, so Delia Ruffin wrote it, and Ruffin and Wood directed The Decade. Wood directed Criers, and Ruffin and Wood wrote Criers. So I think it's a sequel. I think it picks up from... I think Criers is a sequel that picks up from The Decade, which I haven't watched yet. I'm going to watch it. But there was nothing on Tubi, nothing on IMDb that suggested this is in any way a continuation of the world from The Decade, right? So normally, I would hope at least, if a film is a sequel, and in order to understand the world of that film, it helps to have seen the first part. That's a good thing to note on something like a streaming service like Tubi. The fact that it does not say the description doesn't start with something like picking up from the world of The Decade means that I had no idea that this seems to build out of the same, that this is a franchise, right? I had no idea of that, right? So that, I think, really sort of undercut the film for me. And I'm kind of hoping that when I watch The Decade, it will answer a lot of these questions. Though some of the sort of comments I've seen online about The Decade suggest that it may not answer stuff as well. But I do think it's the sort of origin story of this world based on the descriptions that I've seen on Tubi and IMDb. So it's a sort of weird experience in that sense of sort of watching them out of order, assuming, of course, that I'm right and they are basically depicting the same world. Anyway, at some point I will do a video about The Decade after I get around to watching it. I'm sort of in the midst of grading right now, so I don't know when that's going to be, but I will make a video about The Decade. And if it answers the questions I have about Criers, I will let you all know.